about 80% of world's plants, they depend on cross-pollination. And more importantly, about 75% of the food crops that we grow depend on cross-pollination. So think of a world where there is no cross-pollination taking place, so our own food security would be at risk. So that's a real concern.
So honeybees are, I think, important to humans because they provide us with honey and they also provide us with wax. And both of those were extremely important products before we had other sources of sweeteners or waxes. And then, of course, the pollination services that they provide are very important. One of the interesting things about honeybees is the social structure of the colony. And they have lots of amazing behaviors that they use where the individual bees within the colony work together to make the colony function somewhat like an organism. And people oftentimes term this a superorganism.
How beautiful and how amazing these honeybees are. These animals are interesting in itself and that they are actually amazing. And honeybees can be used in experiments, and they are the ones that are telling us how smart and intelligent insects are. If you look at the scientific literature, then about 95 to 97% of all the scientific literature is about Apis mellifera, and only 3 to 5% are studies on these Asian honeybees. Although these Asian honeybees are very important for pollination, in my opinion, what is more important is to study the biology of these Asian honeybees, to see, for example, we don't know anything about their life cycle. So we need to understand the biology to come up with strategies for conservation. So the first thing is to count, to understand whether we have a decline, whether the decline is nationwide, or whether there are specific areas. And what we have to start is long-term monitoring studies. In our study, where we observed the number of colonies at this Pattaya city this year was half of that the year before. But how to say, this is not saying anything about a decline. So you have to measure over several years and then determine what is the average over years. There can be strong fluctuations from one year to the other. And particularly with Apis dorsata, because the nesting sites are depending on the food availability, there can be dramatic changes.
Two things that we need to do. One, we need to cut down on agrochemicals, particularly chemical pesticides in our farming. By doing that, we will not only save important ecosystem service providers like bees in our land, in our agricultural landscape, but in landscape even beyond the agricultural areas. Our own research have really shown the lethal impact pesticide is creating on the honeybees. Secondly, we need to restore the landscape, restore the habitat for the honeybees. And for that, we need to have a list of important plant species that we should propagate in our landscape. And we need to have such lists going for the entire country. These are called dependence ratios.
The main honey species, which is Apis dorsata, is also called the giant Indian rock bee. And that is found all across our subcontinent and further up to Southeast Asia. And those bees provide actually 60 to 70% of the honey that is available in our Indian market. And we never talk about it because we really do not understand the effort that goes behind the collection. It is done by Adivasis. We never get to hear their story. Some of the basic things that we have done is we have created records. So we have mapped these areas from where honey is collected, how much of honey is collected, what are the main species of flowers from where honey is collected, whether it is collected from rocks, whether it is collected from trees. So we do a pollen analysis of each batch of honey that comes in. It helps us to understand and calibrate the information that we get from the community with the science of this. And then that helps us to be able to validate for customers that they are able to understand that each batch of honey is very special because it comes from a certain tree.
Once I started thinking and reading a lot about pollination ecology and pollination biology in general, I wanted my field site to be either in Darjeeling, which is my hometown, or Sikkim. I was born and brought up in this region, and I had a lot of information about the region already, but also because I saw a lot of research gap from this, like biodiversity hotspot in India. But when I was doing my research, which the fieldwork lasted for 4 years, I only found Epicerana coming to visit mandarin orange flowers. I was wondering, like why there's only one species of bee coming to visit mandarin orange. We don't have a lot of literature or research in Sikkim on bees. So I completely relied on oral history for this. So I started asking people whether there were Apis dorsatas or florias coming to visit mandarin orange flowers earlier, older days, like say 20 years back or 30 years back. And then those people said like, yes, it used to come, but now it has stopped.
The research angle is not strong, is a lot of empirical knowledge that needs to be put together with a research body that is able to build a certain data set over time that could answer many questions. Understanding of the flora of an area over changes in a period of 20 years, honey quality over a period of time, understanding and correlating weather patterns with the volume of honey that is available, whether bees are preferring certain flowers and the reasons for that. So all of this put together as research questions we need to understand, and this needs sometimes a support, a civil society working with a research institution to be able to build this body of knowledge. And these gaps constantly we feel it, because when you have to interact with the state, you don't have immediate data.
One of the best parts about the scientific endeavor is the focus on working with other people and making connections and collaborations. And I think that's not just at your own institution, but across the country and across the world. And that's something that I've really focused on as a bee biologist or as a professor working on bee biology, because I think you can get a lot of different expertise that you can bring together and a lot of different viewpoints that can be really helpful in making science move forward. The current situation with COVID-19 is just a great example of the potential for collaboration between scientists across the world. And I think it's hopefully even emphasizes more how we should all be doing that in our research all the time.
Establishing safe habitats, zones which are free from human intervention. We are working with the Aga Khan Trust for Culture very closely to create an appropriate environment, in fact a retreat for the diverse bee species at Sundar Nursery. The collaborative efforts include sharing knowledge and expanding the bee-friendly flora to be planted in additional green spaces at Sundar Nursery, which can ensure sustenance to the bees throughout the year.
often there is a glass wall between the conventional agricultural sort of establishments in the government and the kind of research that we have been trying to promote, the kind of information, the kind of message that we are going to propagate. So this glass wall needs to be broken, and there have to be more synergy in our efforts. Researchers, the planners, the policymakers, the civil society, the farming community, the community leaders, they all need to come together to reverse the scenario and move towards a system which is more ecologically sustainable.
I strongly feel that having women in this field is very important. Even when we go out in the field to, like interview people, we would want, equal participation of male and female, and especially when it comes to nature or conservation related, any questions, especially in the rural parts. It's usually the women who go out in the forest to collect, like fodder or fuel wood or NTFPs. Even in history, like men would go and hunt, and it would be the women, who would gather from the forest. So they have a lot of information, but when we go out and interview them, some of them don't come out openly to talk about it. But if we can, like encourage their participation, maybe we will have more information about wildlife or nature, which will be very valuable input to this field altogether.
We are doing Be Aware workshops open to the general public and is organized by Aga Khan Trust for Culture to create awareness about the diverse honeybee populations also. Apis dorsata, Apis mellifera, Apis cerana, Floria, and the stingless bees, about their life cycle, about the amazing contribution to the ecosystem that they do. And again, why is it necessary to support them in times of crisis?
We've got this great program where we have bees on the roof, and they're helping the environment here in New York City, and they're helping bring pollination to people's minds. Most of the work that we do in the lab and with the bees involves undergraduate researchers. And that's really exciting, in part because you're exposing these younger students to practices and culture of science, but also you're exposing them to honeybees, which is not something that everybody would be exposed to, and it's exciting to watch them learn about honeybees, learn about beekeeping. Some of them just can't get enough of honeybees, and some of them are like, well, I'll just stay in the lab and you bring the honeybees to me. So it can be a spectrum of involvement, but many of the students are so excited to get on the roof with the bees every time we go out there. And I think that they will remember their experiences researching honeybees, for the rest of their life. And some of them may even become beekeepers.